Zapraszam serdecznie pana Tomasza ZDZIKOTA, sekretarza stanu w Ministerstwie Obrony, o zabranie głosu, wygłoszenie głównego wystąpienia podczas tej konferencji. Bardzo proszę.
Szanowna pani minister, pani poseł, szanowny panie pośle, szanowni państwo.
Mr. MP, ladies and gentlemen, officers, soldiers, and police officers, and dear distinguished guests, I would like to thank you for the invitation to take part in today's meeting. At the same time, I allow myself to start with congratulations to the organizers and to Ms. MEP on this fantastic event that has been developed on a very short notice. And I'd like to congratulate on involving so many distinguished panelists, and I'm delighted to be part of yet another event which focuses here in Tri-City on the issue which is key to my professional interest, i.e. cybersecurity. And I'm saying it's yet another event, as yesterday I had the pleasure of being at the Naval Academy in Gdynia and speak to some of the distinguished professors who are here with us, and that's the tertiary education institution which reports to the Minister of Defense and also teaches students and undergraduates and postgraduates on cybersecurity. And I'm so happy to see yet another such event which relates Tri-City to cybersecurity. I allow myself to build my short presentation around a schema. I'd like to particularly stress some of the keywords, some sort of a notional spine around which we would have to build any talks which are related to cybersecurity, and such keywords which are very often invoked in conferences on cybersecurity. There are quite a lot of them. Allow me just to list the 4 basic ones. First of those is, from my point of view, is the word of awareness. We need to be aware of what world we live in. This is the world which has been changing dramatically and truly dynamically, and the advancing digitization of industries and economies renders the issues of ICT security and network security and mobile device security renders all these truly fundamental. We also live in a global world whereby the consequences of actions and events in a single state will reverberate in other states which not necessarily are direct neighbors of that state. To really realize and be aware of the scale of what I'm talking about, it's very often done, but I think it gives you an insight, and allow me to invoke some statistics. But those are essential to understand the essence of what we're talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world of riches, abundance of information, whereby the number of stimuli we are exposed to has been radically increasing. Many years ago, in 1472, the best university library in Queen's College at Cambridge had 199 copies of books, so potentially each and every student and professor could read all of them. Now 300,000 books are printed annually. In 1992, there were 100 gigabytes of information created daily. In 2000, every hour, 2001, every second, and in 2018, 20,000 gigabytes of data every second. It is that every other day such an amount of data is created that all humankind created until 2008, since its dawn. In 2002, just above 70 million websites were in operation. In 2014, a billion of those was surpassed. It's estimated that by 2030, the number of constantly connected devices to the internet will reach 50 billion. So all this data shows us how much the digital world and information and also issues related to big data have entered all the areas of activity of a person, organization, business, a state, an international alliance, and how they determine our behaviors and actions in a number of areas of activity. This is also fundamental from the point of view of security. We need to have this awareness, as I was to talk about awareness, that the digital world is not anymore, as it used to be agreed, an area of entertainment and interpersonal communication and search for knowledge. With advances in digitalization, this is where life activity and economic activity of persons is located, and this is where security and economic development is based on ICT. This is the heart of modern societies, economies, and states. At the same time, this is also the world where keeping security is more of a challenge and launching an attack is relatively easy, as an attack in cyberspace is also characterized by some common features. We could say that there is a common denominator for such attacks and threats in cyberspace. Transborder nature of such attacks is part of that, as one doesn't need to be physically on the territory of a state to attack it. So a cyberspace attack is also relatively cheap. It's relatively easy to conduct. It doesn't require any long preparation. And a cyberspace attack is also a quick one. It's an attack whose ramifications can be experienced immediately. It's also an attack whereby activities, I wouldn't like to say easily, as that would be not good enough, but it's much easier than in the real world to be tempted to be anonymous, being the perpetrator. It's much easier than in the real world to try and muddy the waters for the law enforcement or any other entities who try to track back the source of the attack to the origin. So it's no surprise that, invoking some statistics data, in the 20 most industrially advanced states of the world, more than 1 billion of persons fell victim of criminal activity on the internet, and half of those had at least a single device infected by malware. Almost a third of those had their passwords compromised, as it's really difficult in the real world to have one's ID, credit cards, passport, and a number of other key documents stolen, whereas in cyberspace, ID theft is one of the most rampant of threats. And this, the effect is the identity theft, i.e. taking over someone's login criteria allows one to impersonate someone and to initiate actions to indulge in nefarious activity. And we must assume that cyberspace is not a secure space for individuals, states, or institutions, as we need to bear in mind that each and every chain, it's an old cliche, one could say, so a chain is as strong as its weakest link. It also applies to cyberspace. The weakest link is very often a human. as it is the human who sometimes fails to comply with procedures or doesn't act with due diligence. And what we can consider one of the most essential tests that have been conducted for years by a number of security directors at organizations, which is that a memory stick is lost. And then it's very easy to actually observe that such memory stick is typically becomes part of the network of that organization, and the weakest link is the person who is very curious who tries to check what there is on that data device. It was as early as 1998, Mr. George Tenet, the then head of CIA, said that our future is built on the resources we haven't learned yet to protect. One could say it was a truly visionary statement, and we've been dealing with that since then. And advancing digitization has been coupled also to some extent with growing awareness of threats and on a number of areas of our activity. Also, speaking of such challenges and threats, we also need to speak specifically of attacks and threats related to states and organizations, as the proverbial expression that a chain is as strong as its weakest link also applies to international alliances. Also speaking of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as all of it will be, the whole will be only as strong as its weakest link. We've heard a lot of things said about the events in Estonia, which was some sort of the starting point for developing ICT security, and now Estonia being one of the global leaders in the area. But also according to government data of a number of countries, also those of Poland, we can say that no country in the world can feel free from threats in cyberspace. And that's why we can't say that we're in peacetime in cyberspace, i.e. peacetime. I think it's the C time, i.e. conflict. Mr. Havranek has been kind enough to say what the essence of NATO is. It's a defense pact, an alliance. I think it's also interesting from the legal standpoint, not only speaking of the actions of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but also of the activity of the state and its law enforcement agencies, is how to respond to attacks, and we have a number of tools, arsenal. Speaking of the USA, on aggregate in 2015, there were as many as 77,000 attacks on support networks working with the government of the USA, and that increased from 5,500 in 2006. At the same time, it is observed, according to American data, an increase of more than 1,000% of attacks which we can dub state-sponsored, i.e. triggered and effected by groups which could be tied to governments of third countries. Speaking of Polish data, as we don't only have to rely on international data, we've got reports of Internal Security Agency and CERT.gov.pl, which is the century of the government networks. And in 2017, we had more than 28,000 of incidents of related to government networks in Poland, and that's a steep curve in terms of the increase. That we have an increase of reports. Speaking of confirmed reports, which were actual threats, there were 6,000 of such, and we're just talking of threats and attacks aimed at government networks, for which Internal Security Agency takes responsibility or custody, but also even events which are finally recognized as lack of updates or systemic threats. we can say that the awareness is on the increase, which is good, but we've also got an increased number of confirmed incidents. We know that data quoted by internal security agency, it's not an aggregated data with regard to all systems and installations countrywide. We've also got critical infrastructure and networks which are outside the field of responsibility of the agency. I think those are the statistics which support us in establishing the scale of the phenomenon. The second word, which is key, speaking of cybersecurity, is cooperation. And it is a multifaceted cooperation, as it could be cross-institutional, international, and also private-public partnership and cooperation. Also important from the standpoint of NATO requirements that have been talked about today here. NATO estimates that about 98% of logistics and supplies of North Atlantic Treaty Organization passes through the hands of private businesses. That itself testifies to the fact of how fundamental civil and military administrations' cooperations with businesses is. NATO, while issuing guidelines for security in member states of the treaty, names a special category which is robustness, readiness in the civil area, and that readiness is in the readiness of infrastructure, especially critical infrastructure, which is the most essential from the standpoint of security of NATO, i.e. to ensure the security of infrastructure also in ICT dimensions. And we have 7 criteria there that a state should take active action. First of all, it's just contingency guarantee for governments, ensuring energy supply, ability to efficiently deal with problems of chaotic persons movement, also ensuring food and water supply, also dealing with a number of casualties, and also ensuring effective transportation. This is where we've got everywhere rising ICT and digitalization, and all of these are also important from the point of view of the NATO summit, which was held in Warsaw, which also confirmed that cyberspace is a domain within which NATO should also be as active and ensure security as actively, should take on threats as they are with in the Navy or airspace or on the ground. Speaking of cooperation, we also need to trust each other. So trust is the third key word. So sharing intelligence on security policies and incidents that requires trust between institutions and states and the public and private sector. How to build that trust? There are a number of instruments that could be deployed here, and one of those is definitely joint maneuvers and training, and joint education, just to have a uniform notional apparatus, so that when a threat actually materializes, such a threat could be unequivocally and quickly be addressed. And another key word we mustn't forget is money. As we know, cybersecurity is, of course, incredibly expensive. It costs, and at the same time, no one can guarantee that even footing sizable bills on cybersecurity will ensure contingency for organizations or states, as it's impossible, of course, to ensure that. And there's a growing discrepancy between daily costs to ensure contingency, and also those that one needs to fend off an attack. As you know, launching an attack in cyberspace is quick and easy and cheap. also because we also have encrypted communications with the application of some commonly available tools, and it allows for such attacks to be coordinated internationally, i.e. the awareness of threats, cooperation, trust and money. All these come together, and that awareness, which stems from the first user to the top management of an organization or the top brass of the treaty or a state or a business, there will never be enough funding, and this is something we need to bear in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, what has been done in that area in Poland and what is being done? One of my four speakers, Mr. Minister Krzysztof Silicki, did speak about us being at the stage of developing structures and mechanisms, and it's a very important step. Currently in Parliament, we are proceeding the bill on the national cyber security system, and the bill was drafted by experts of Ministry of Digital Affairs, Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Internal Affairs and Internal Security Agency. This is an act which organizes all the notions and organizational structures and introduces a number of systems that will help us address the threats of the modern world. It's a very important event, a bill, and I do hope that it will very soon be enacted by Parliament and signed into law. We at the Ministry of Defense do watch and take part in all the actions of NATO with regard to cyberspace security. We do see all new initiatives, and there are many of those with new arriving on a daily basis, and we do try to take an active part in all of those. At the same time, we are really watchful and do talk about any solutions deployed in specific states. Of course, the USA lead the way. And we've also been watching how operational capacity by US Cyber Command is assumed, i.e. the American Command for Cyberspace, and they have been fully deployed. And we can say that we not only watch, but we've also been working intensively on our own solutions, also related to structure development. Of course, we've got some experiences. Structure development is really fundamental. Before I started my stint with the Ministry of Defense, I worked at the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Administration, and there with the chief commander of the police force, we worked together to deploy the structure in the form of the Office for Combating Cybercrime at the Chief Police Command Office. But now, following the order of Minister Mariusz Błaszczak, a new team has been formed. It was last March, and I had that team, and we deal with cybersecurity in the ministry, and we've been developing a program of increasing our capacity for addressing threats related to cybersecurity and ICT, and also encryption. As all of those are really fundamental notions, and the things we need to address are numerous, and all of you who've been working in the public sector have been quite aware of those, as you do encounter these problems on a daily basis, and we have things which are related to educating, gaining, and retaining well-qualified experts within our ranks. And of course, it's quite clear, and to ensure security, we need to have, first of all, fantastically educated personnel who are educated in a uniform pattern. They need to be able to communicate with each other. Uniform methodologies of training need to be deployed. They need to cooperate. They need to keep training and developing their expertise, and they also need to be well paid so that they don't fall to the temptation of high pay in the private sector. Of course, we know it's a horizontal task, and everyone is responsible for it. and the private and public sector are responsible alike for it. But speaking of the national security and we do need such experts, and we've been doing what we can to improve the training and retain such personnel whom we've already trained and footed the bill for training of. We would like to effect the consolidation of resources. We have got many such resources. We've got depth of brilliant computer scientists who've also been winning NATO competitions. Lately, I could congratulate on our IT specialists from Military Technical Academy who won the NATO hackathon in Montenegro, and another Polish team came second. And we've got fantastic teams in terms of software and hardware, and we need to, of course, use their talent and brilliance. And to round up my speech, allow me to invoke the words of General Mark Milley, who is the Chief of General Staff at the US Army. And he says that the next shot in war will be fired in cyberspace, and it will be a destructive one. I think it's a sign of times. I think now, being in charge of security of a state or of a treaty, it could not only be on state-of-the-art jet fighter jets, or Navy ship, or being a special task force soldier. It could also be in front of the computer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bardzo dziękuję panu ministrowi za...
Thank you very much, Minister, for this delivery. Thank you for drawing this Polish and international context for cyber security, also the military, addressing the military aspects. I would just like to inform you that here with us we have had the opportunity to have the head of the Solidarity trade union leader, Piotr Duda, has been with us, and also His Excellence, the Ambassador of Great Britain to Poland, Mr. Jonathan Marks. It is a pleasure. Now I'd like to invite the facilitator, and I will first present the facilitator, and after that I hope that he'll take over, and then he will present the distinguished guests we have here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Weissman is an advisor to the European Conservatives and Reformers in the European Parliament. He's a specialist in combating terror and security policies, also in geopolitics. Before he started advising our political group and serving the ECR MPs, he's also my advisor. He also advises the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Special Anti-Terrorist Committee. Before he started, however, he was the Chief Secretary of the Transatlantic Association, a prestigious and interesting organization which offers advice to numerous institutions and is highly visible in the...
Without much ado, we have excellent panelists. Jason, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, please allow me to first extend and echo the sentiments of the Secretary to thank Mrs. Fatiga for putting together such a fantastic group of panelists, as well as a very distinguished audience. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here and in such fantastic company. And I would like us to move to the Q&A as quickly as possible. So I will be very brief in my introductory remarks. In the Canadian Armed Forces, they teach you never to say that you're outnumbered on the radio waves. You have to say that you're in a target-rich environment. And when we look at the cybersecurity dynamics that we're faced with today, it's a very target-rich environment because generally speaking, you have two kinds of governments or industries, those that know they've been breached and those that haven't figured it out yet. And when you're coping with this kind of environment that is changing on a daily basis, you're facing a very growing threat of cyber warfare like never before. In particular, we're seeing the rise of aggressive state and non-state actors. And major aggressors present a risk to many NATO members and EU members, of course, to counter this by improving their awareness and their capabilities simultaneously. And as the transatlantic community continues to become increasingly wired in for daily life, we're seeing what's called the rise of the platform economy, which permits advanced algorithms to grow up and live in the cloud, which has in effect turned a lot of traditional assets, such as jet engines and drones, into services rather than products. And this has left us with a key question of how strong is our capacity to withstand or recover quickly from the next cyber attack? In a sense, how resilient are we? And while it's difficult to measure the amount of cyber attacks at any given time, by this point in last year, in 2017, there was an estimated 2 billion records were lost or stolen by June 2017, and this is a 164% increase from the previous year. And in recent times, we've seen large-scale malware attacks that shut down networks through harmful emails, links, malware websites, and these are the types of attacks that really only a state sponsor could perpetuate. Now, in addition to disrupting daily operations, attackers are looking to exploit the data and information and to gain access to classified and private records, as well as obtain permanent connections to vulnerable networks. And key targets have really been both healthcare sector and the energy sector. And last year, we saw the famous cases of WannaCry and Petya, both deemed to be the work of state actors, and both relied very heavily on ransomware that exploited backdoor vulnerabilities. And as the sophistication of these attacks increases, so does the difficulty in identifying and locating the culprits. And despite evidence that points to states like Russia, North Korea, China as complicit in these actions, it will only get harder to prove this over time, which is why building capabilities to deter, prevent, and manage cyber attacks is an essential goal for any nation or industry. Now, I don't want to steal any thunder from our speakers here today, so I'll be brief in outlining a few trends to the buildup of cyber defense fortifications and advancement of key regulations and initiatives that are being in place right now to help secure European cyberspace. So from the EU side, you've seen the establishment and strengthening of ENISA, the European Network and Information Security Agency, which is an EU agency that's tasked with cyber trainings, certifications, and capacity building. The General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is now in effect, and this requires industries that are collecting EU citizen data to boost their protection and their response efforts. And you have the Directive on Network and Information Systems, or the NIS Directive, which requires member states to build cyber defenses and to cooperate on issues of cybersecurity. And finally, you have the Cooperative Technical Agreement on Cyber Defense with NATO, which is in place to boost cooperation on trainings, information sharing, exercises, and research. And as the cybersecurity landscape is really at a crossroads, predicting these threats is not only difficult, but sustaining cooperation across government, defense, industry, building resilience, and establishing adaptable capabilities is the only way that we can really prepare ourselves for the future of this threat. So it's on this note that I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker on today's panel, Senior Strategic Analyst of the European Cyber Crime Center at Europol, based in The Hague, Dr. Nicole van der Meulen. Nicole, the floor is yours.
I presume it's on. All right. I think everyone's expressed their gratitude for being here, but please allow me 1 second to also be extremely grateful for being invited and to be visiting Gdansk, which has been so far a marvelous city. Before I get started, I do wish to devote a couple of words to Europol and in particular EC3 for those who might not be sufficiently familiar with us. I believe it's very important to emphasize that our primary role is not to carry out investigations. Actually, we do not carry out investigations at all, but we exist to support the member states in their cross-border investigations and to coordinate collective actions across the EU and along with some other third-party countries that we cooperate with. So within that context, we have the EC3, where part of it is operational, focused on 3 pillars: payment fraud, child sex exploitation, and what we call cyber-dependent crime. And there is a strategy component that I'm a part of that focuses on strategic threat analysis, but also policy challenges the law enforcement community faces and how we can collectively respond to those as Europol. So on that note, I would like to share with you a few key messages that I think have already been touched upon by the keynote speaker, but I still wish to emphasize them and to contextualize them how this works for us as Europol and as the EU law enforcement community. First of all, cybersecurity must be approached from a holistic perspective. I think we've already come a long way. I've been in this field for several years, and I think in the beginning there was way too much emphasis on prevention and a lack of acceptance that incidents do take place. I think we've now reached a stage where we accept that, and part of that acceptance also means that we focus on a response and recovery. Basically, how do we respond and what is our resilience? But a holistic perspective also includes having the ability to disrupt, attribute, and investigate unlawful activity online. So that means that is where we come in. Of course, our primary focus is on cybercrime, and I know that's very difficult to delineate, but we still try to focus as much on that, so there's far less emphasis on what some of the other speakers have spoken about with respect to the geopolitical dimension, I would say. The first keynote speaker spoke about the blueprint for a coordinated response to large-scale cross-border cybersecurity incidents and crises. This is an essential element when we speak about resilience and when we speak about approaching cybersecurity holistically. When WannaCry and NotPetya took place last year, Europol noticed how there is a necessity for a coordinated response. Several law enforcement agencies were reaching out to internet security providers to gather intelligence, and that's when we started working on what we call a law enforcement emergency response protocol. Now, this is not separate to the blueprint. This is our way of contributing to the blueprint, of carrying our weight and saying, we also want to have shared situational awareness, an effective response, and a common message. Basically, to have a single point of contact as opposed to all these different agencies reaching out to the providers. And then on to, I think, what next point that was also mentioned by the previous keynote speaker. Cybersecurity requires international coordination and cooperation. I don't think anyone will deny that. But this is where EC3 and Europol in general plays a crucial role. Because the cross-border nature of cybercrime requires an overarching entity that is able to coordinate and enhance cooperation. And this is across the different member states and our third-party partners, but also with the private sector. If you look at many of the EC3 operations that we have carried out, you notice how many different law enforcement agencies are involved, but also how many private partners are involved. And if you look at the operations as well, the interesting thing is it's not just about identifying perpetrators. That is a very important part of it, that is essential to law enforcement, as is obviously arrestations and subsequent prosecution. But another very important element is to disrupt the infrastructure of criminals. And for this, I wish to mention at least one case that I think has been crucial and has been one of the most successful operations coordinated by EC3, and that has been the takedown of two of the biggest darknet markets last year, and that was Hansa and Alphabay. And this was a tremendous blow to the infrastructure because these were two of the most popular darknet markets online. And the reason why it was such a blow was not exclusively because they were taken down. It was also because the Dutch police was able to take over Hansa for a month. What that means is they basically took over the administration and carried on the market for the purpose of gathering intelligence. And it was only after 1 month that they took it down and that they mentioned to the users that they had been controlling the marketplace for a month. And this has been particularly impactful because it's a tremendous blow to the trust of buyers and users. But it's also essential because it was a way for the law enforcement community to gather intelligence on the buyers and the vendors. The third message is governments must enable law enforcement to conduct investigations. The law enforcement community faces tremendous challenges when it comes to cybercrime investigations, and some of those do occur as a result of legal challenges where different policies are required. A main element of that is loss of data or loss of access to data. The European Court of Justice decision when it comes to data retention has made matters very complicated for law enforcement and in some cases even impossible. And this is an ongoing file that we are trying to resolve as we can, as good as we can. Another challenge is more technical in nature, but does require cooperation with the private sector, but also a policy response, and that is in the area of encryption that I believe was also previously mentioned. These challenges we face from the law enforcement community, we try to voice them as much as we can. That is part of what at least the strategy unit is used for within Europol, because all different member states face them. So we were happy to see that at least there is an attempt at trying to also respond to the challenge of acquiring data that is in a different location. So the European Commission introduced the e-evidence package, the US has introduced the Cloud Act, and those are at least attempts to see how can we deal with this challenge of being able to acquire data by a private sector partner where it is in a different location and there's conflicting legal interpretations, I would say. This leads me to my fourth key message, where private sector participation is essential for coherent response against cybercrime. Nobody would deny this either. Like I said, many of our operations require input from the private sector. Basically, they have part of the information that we do not have and that we need in order to carry out investigations and in order to identify perpetrators and arrest them. Many of our overarching operations demonstrate how we cooperate. So a couple of examples are the European Money Mule Action Week, where we cooperate with banks, the Global Airline Action Days, where we cooperate with airports and airline. No More Ransom has been a great success, which is more in the prevention and awareness section, where we really try to help victims of ransomware by making decryption keys available, and this has really been the result of input both from law enforcement as well as from internet security providers. So because I'm conscious of time, I'll move on to the last message I wish to give, and I think was also touched upon by the keynote speaker, and that is that despite the fact that I emphasize this need for a holistic perspective, we are conscious that prevention and awareness can actually assist citizens in their security efforts. So even though they may not be able to prevent everything, by making them aware of the risks and by giving them guidance as to how they can minimize this risk, reduce damage, we can really help them along. And this is another part where Europol really tries to contribute by coordinating campaigns across the different member states. And I'm very proud that we are involved in this. We do this in different areas, but I think I'm most proud when it comes to educating children and teenagers about how they can potentially be taken advantage of and what to do on the internet, how to be more reluctant as to not to provide people with potential material that allows them to extort you. I think this is very important, just as what we call the Deterring Youngsters Project, where if you have youngsters, you have teenagers with technical skills, how do you make them aware that they can use these skills for a safer cyberspace as opposed to for a more criminal one? So I wish to finish on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Dr. Igor Loganov, is a legal advisor at the Cybersecurity Situational Center in the Security Service of Ukraine. Dr. Ivanov, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Dzień dobry, panie I panowie. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Dziękuję bardzo, szanowni państwo, za zaproszenie do dyskusji z cyberbezpieczeństwa. First of all, I would like to extend gratitude for the given possibility to take part in this forum and for the constant support of Ukraine in the international area. I shall speak about cyber attacks directed to the critical infrastructure of Ukraine that took place during 2014-2018, and to share with you the experience of Ukraine concerning the protection against them. Besides, to tell more about our national system of cybersecurity, its legislative base, and the cooperation between Ukraine and NATO, the public and private partnership. As you already know, Ukraine has been in the state of armed conflict with Russia since 2014. Since then, we have been observing the stable growth of cyber attacks in intensity on the computer networks of Ukraine, the complexity of their technologies, and harmful implications. From the above mentioned, we made a conclusion that mentioned cyber attacks are the important element of hybrid war against our country. We found out that the group of hackers was involved in conduction of these attacks, who, according to our data, cooperate with the Russian special services. To hide the real performance of cyber attacks, both networks created on the territory of third countries are used. On the 25th of May 2014, the hardware of the Central Election Commission of Ukraine was infected by malware, which falsified the graphic image of presidents of Ukraine election results on the electronic scoreboard of Commission. Since the appearance of a fake page, the mass media of Russian Federation started to show the fake data concerning the results of presidential elections in Ukraine. It means that this cyber attack became the instrument of conducting the informational war against Ukraine. On the 23rd of December 2015, because of the cyber attack Black Energy, about 225,000 of suppliers lost electricity in their houses in some regions of Ukraine. On the 6th of December 2016, the cyber attack paralyzed the work of state treasury. The cyber attack caused the termination of social benefits, which could cause the mass riots. Herewith, with the help of channel of communication of the state treasury, the computer system of Ministry of Finance was infected. On the 14th of December 2016, the server of the joint automated system of managing the railway transport of Ukrzaliznytsia company, which manages the traffic of trains, was attacked. At the same time, informational systems of some regional departments of its informational center were attacked. As a result of cyber attack, the operation of railway traffic was partly blocked. To avoid the negative implications, they had for some time to manage the movement of trains manually. On the 7th of December 2016, the state energetic company Ukrenergo was attacked, and as a result, some separate districts of Kyiv region were disconnected from the energy supply system. The most dangerous and massive cyber attack named WannaCry 2 Petya A Petya C took place on the 27th of June 2017. The cyber attack was conducted from the single center with powerful technical equipment. According to our estimation, The intensity, technology, and implication of such attacks testify about the usage of the territory of Ukraine as a test ground for cyber weapons of Russian Federation, demonstration of this cyber potential, verifying the level of cyber protection of our computer systems, the speed to react to cyber incidents, and the renovation of attacked objects of infrastructure. Taking into account the above-mentioned during the last years, the national system of cybersecurity has actively been created. The main directions of its development were defined by the cybersecurity strategy of Ukraine, and its structure and principles of functioning are defined by the law of Ukraine on the basic principles of providing the cybersecurity. At the same time, we cannot say that we start to create the systems of cybersecurity from the beginning. The legal base of cyber protection in Ukraine began to emerge after getting the independence. The cybersecurity legal base forms adopted in 1994 the law of Ukraine on the protection of information and information telecommunications systems, and the Act of President of Ukraine on the technical and cryptographic protection of information. Now there are dozens of legal acts in the domain of cybersecurity which regulate the requirements concerning the information protection, the order of creation of information protection systems, confirmation of their compliance, licensing of services in this domain, and some other questions. However, the main problem of Ukraine's legal base in the security domain connected with the fact that the validity of the above-mentioned legal acts is spread only to organizations, enterprises, and state-owned entities. Now the efforts of our state service for information protection are directed to the development of new cybersecurity legal provisions for the objects of critical infrastructure of private-owned enterprises. The work of cybersecurity subjects in different sectors is managed by the National Coordination Center, Cybersecurity Center, that was created at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. This center organizes, coordinates, and controls the cyber protection, cyber defense, cyber intelligence, cyber counterintelligence, countering to cyber crimes on the territory of Ukraine. The network of sectoral situational centers of various sectors should form the technological base of national system of cybersecurity. Today we have a situational cyber incident response center in the State Service for Communications and Information Protection of Ukraine, and situational center of countering cyber threats in the Security Service of Ukraine. The activity of situational cyber incident response center is directed to protection of the computer networks of the critical infrastructure objects from cyber attacks. Representatives of the center keep track of anomalies in the work of specified networks. In case of detection of the cyber attack, they help the administration of the object to localize this attack and eliminate negative consequences. Situational Center of Counter Cyber Threats of the Security Service of Ukraine works for prevention. It gathers information about known cyber threats from all possible sources, analyzes them for detection of demasking attributes, and distributes this information between consumers. In such a way, the Security Service of Ukraine prevented the cyber attack in autumn of the last year. This attack could be of a larger scale than cyber attack Petya I, Petya C. It must be mentioned that situational centers of the State Service for Communication and Information Protection and the one of Security Service of Ukraine are created with the help of foreign partners in the frames of the NATO-Ukraine Trust Fund on Cybersecurity. For today, the first stage of realization of this trust fund is completed, so Ukraine received the technical equipment and software for both situational centers. The proposals of Ukraine side concerning the second stage are prepared in the project of concept of enhancing the possibilities of Ukraine in the cybersecurity sphere, which was presented during the session of Common NATO-Ukraine Work Group on military reforms, where it was positively estimated by our foreign partners, and we agreed with the Romanian side during the working meeting that was held in December 2017 in Bucharest. On the second stage of Trust Fund realization, it is decided to connect to both situational centers, sensors of cyber incidents, integrated in the informational telecommunication system of objects of critical infrastructure. It's a wise for prevention of large-scale cyber attacks on the computer networks of Ukraine. We need to adjust the cooperation with the state and business. That's why in frames of state-private ownership, the security service of Ukraine, on the voluntary basis, can give the access to the own database MISP-UA to each object of critical infrastructure. For today, the corporation Antonov and one of the biggest banks of Ukraine, private bank, are connected to it. The desire to be connected to the system showed some other powerful operators and providers of telecommunications, commercial banks, and other enterprises. For today, the security service of Ukraine considers MISP to be the basic platform for the fruitful cooperation between the cyber counterintelligence and business. In this frame, service will inform the administrations of critical infrastructure objects about the cyber attacks, and the latter will respond to them without waiting for harmful consequences for themselves, for the state and society. Also, we hope that other European countries continue to supply of Ukraine at forms of joint trainings, courses, and other measures in cybersecurity area. We need also again of daily cooperation between European state and private sectors inside and outside European countries. It's well known that Ukraine is front line of targets for cyber weapons, and this factor forces us to claim to strengthen international sharing of information about cyber threats. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Please. When we arrive at the Q&A, I would love to direct a question regarding what kind of support other European allies can provide, given that Ukraine is indeed a frontline state and a testing ground. Now, I wanted to move on to the next speaker, which will be via video introduction, Dr. Konstantinos Moulinos, who is the info security expert of ENISA. And he has recorded his remarks in advance to try and provide a very clear position on the NIS directive and its implications for cybersecurity. Please.
Hi, my name is Konstantinos Moulinos. I'm an information security expert of ENISA and one of the key contact persons between ENISA and the cooperation group of the NIS directive. First, I would like to thank the colleagues from the Parliament who invited me to speak about cybersecurity at this event. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to be present there. However, I feel and I hope that my short intervention will contribute to the discussions that will follow. ENISA stands for the European Union Agency on Network Information Security, and it acts as a center of excellence around cybersecurity for Europe. The objective of my intervention is to provide you with details and as well as with key lessons learned out of the collaboration with the cooperation group and the implementation of the NIS directive so far. And this is because I consider NIS directive and the GDPR as the key instruments around cybersecurity at the moment for Europe. You will see 5 points. As regards the first point, ENISA plays a major role in the implementation of the NIS directive by providing input to the Commission and the Member States, and by performing studies relevant to topics such as critical infrastructures, Internet of Things, smart grids and smart meters, and other innovative technologies, in close collaboration with public and private stakeholders. As regards the second bullet, the participation of ENISA in the NIS cooperation group, ENISA supports all 7 at the moment work streams of the cooperation group by drafting and contributing to the non-binding documents that these subgroups have prepared and adopted. With regard to item number 3, the Secretariat of CSET Network, as explained before, ENISA runs the Secretariat of CSET Network and also provides and manages a series of tools which ensure the seamless communication of communication and information exchange among the members of the CSET network. The CSET network has tackled 2 well-known incidents in the previous year, during the last year. One was the non-Petaya incident, and the other one was the WannaCry incident. With regard to item number 4, we expect that the new Cybersecurity Act, which is still in consultation, will deliver more active role to ENISA in the area of standardization. And finally, as regards the 5th bullet point, the last one, ENISA is supporting the organization of Cyber Europe exercise, which is, since 2010, which is considered to be the largest and most comprehensive cyber security exercise in Europe. One important finding and lesson learned is that a few member states only have the experience on the topics relevant to cyber security in the NIS directive, which automatically leads to diverse maturity levels among the member states. Also, there are diverse views regarding the different approaches as regards the cyber security among the member states, and this leads the member states to the reluctance to adopt elements which might lead to a common approach relevant to cyber security. In addition, some member states follow sectorial approaches versus cross-cutting approaches, and especially this is true as regards the implementation of security measures. In other words, some member states implement the security measures for each different measures for different sectors, although at the same time other member states implement the same security measures for all sectors. For all these reasons, all these factors delay or hinder the adoption of a common approach with regard to cyber security among the member states, and therefore making the objective of the one single market more difficult to achieve. Delays also have been observed as regards the transposition and the meeting of and the difficulties of the member states to meet the calendar deadlines set by the directive. The majority of the member states claim lack of resources and time-consuming administrative procedures as the key reasons behind these delays. Finally, yet importantly, there are concerns among the member states for the different and sometimes conflicting, overlapping I would say, conflicting is a strong word, overlapping security requirements stemming from other regulatory texts with similar security requirements and similar scope, like, for example, the security requirements stemming from the GDPR. However, despite all these difficulties, we at ENISA will remain quite optimistic, and we believe that a lot of things can be done at the European level. We should harmonize the approach to cybersecurity across Europe to avoid creating weak links of the increasingly interconnected European critical infrastructures. We should have a common understanding of the cyber threat landscape and develop a common response framework that helps operators to better protect their own critical assets. Also, a lot of things can be done inside the operators. For example, top management of operators of essential services should invest more on cybersecurity because cyber attacks are becoming more difficult to tackle and more complicated. Also, there is a need to bridge the gap, the cultural gap between operational technology and information technology. There is also a need to improve information sharing and knowledge exchange within critical sectors and between public and private stakeholders. As a result of the work that has been carried out by ENISA all these years, we consider that ENISA is ideally positioned to assist the Member States in implementing the NIS directive. ENISA will continue to work together with stakeholders in the critical sectors and continue to support the European Commission in the sectorial policy initiatives, and will continue also to push for more collaboration among Member States and the public and private sector. Closing this intervention, I would like to take a key message with you. It is a common position for ENISA that cybersecurity is a shared responsibility and no one can deal with it alone. For that reason, we believe that in order to adopt new technologies securely and reap the benefits of a modern digital society, we can do that only by working together, by exchanging good practices and sharing information and collaborating. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you will enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you.
All right, and now we've arrived at our final panelist, Dr. Adam Lalonik, who is the president of Center for Propaganda and Disinformation Analysis. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start from the main point I want to make today. It's like this. We can't treat the cyberspace separately from the information space. It's quite on the contrary what is happening in the West, and this is partially because we do not understand our enemy. As our today's guest from Georgia mentioned before, for Russia, for instance, cyber sphere is part of broader concept, part of broader strategy. For us, it's like a goal in itself. I will come back to this point because I wanted also to refer to Mr. ZDZIKOT's fantastic speech because he unconsciously touched one point I wanted to make today. It is true that we are as strong as our weakest link. And it is also true that the weakest point of every system is human factor. And Mr. ZDZIKOT also mentioned three levels of collaboration between institutions, between on international level and state and private sector. There is also one other sphere of collaboration which we are missing, unfortunately, not only in Poland. This is state and social and society. This is our biggest problem because we can't build cyber resilience without societal resilience, a concept hardly known in Poland or in the Western countries. We need the society because the state is incapable of doing everything. That is why experts in Poland have many things to envy, for example, to our Estonian colleagues or the colleagues from the Czech Republic, because the attitude of the states, those states, is different. Many experts referring to NATO say one thing, that NATO is strong as its weakest link. But how weak is the weakest link? Every state is as weak as our societies. The level of polarization inside is rising. It is easier and cheaper for external enemies to attack us from outside. Taking this into account, why there is a need, how the state can change the situation. Opening to collaboration with NGO sector and using best practices from our partners from abroad in the sphere of partnership between state and non-governmental structures can help and can change much faster our security situation. I wanted also to mention a case that which is not so popular in many analyses in Europe, the case of Bad Rabbit ransomware. Why it is interesting and why it is so important to treat cybersphere and information sphere together. Because Bad Rabbit ransomware targeted mainly media outlets, internet pages. I can easily imagine a situation in which this type of attack is highly coordinated and is large scale. What does it mean? If some actor, state, non-state, private, would decide to attack in the same way mainstream media in certain country, potentially in any country, it would block, for example, the mainstream media even for a couple of hours. It would allow, for example, foreign power to use its alternative channels to communicate with the society and to block society from certain information. It could be for 1 hour, it could be for 3 hours, it could be for a day, because Russia all the time is targeting the democracy itself, our fundamentals of our political system, the trust in our institutions, and including the media. This is only one example of how those spheres, information sphere and cyber sphere, overlap. They are interconnected. To build true resilience, we need to build true societal resilience, because our society reflects in many different, on many different levels. The attitude and the awareness of our elites, political elites, is a function of our society, and there is always a problem with attribution. But in cybersphere, it's much more difficult to state like 100% that for the attack was this and this organization was responsible. But still, we have a lot of different evidence who may be. Is it so important to state that this was FSB or a GRU or different organization from Russia? The threat is common for all the Western countries, and this is what we are missing all the time is we lost a lot of time, and we can't afford to lose it even more. That's why building societal security, societal resilience should involve education. Education is so important in the sphere of information security and cyber security. We can also refer to the example of Cambridge Analytica. People don't have the awareness what not to do, how not to behave in the internet, and unconsciously they may work as a tool for certain groups, organizations, or states, and help them divide our society, help them to interfere in our, for example, political processes, and further destabilize our internal situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.